Hi, everyone. My name's Amber, and I'm the Executive Director of Goodell Gardens and Homestead. I am so excited to be able to share the story of the Goodell sisters with you. So I'll be on the screen a little bit today, but I'm not always going to be on the screen throughout the entire thing. But then when it's time for questions and answers, I'll pop my face back on. So thanks so much for being here, and I'm really excited to see you. All right. So it is my esteemed pleasure to have the opportunity to share the story about the women of Goodell. I think that it's really an honor to be a woman who works for Goodell Gardens and Homestead, and to have just the opportunity to take the dream of these women that you see on your screen and really make it become a reality. So we're going to talk today about these four women and a little bit about Goodell Gardens and Homestead. But I'm going to talk a little bit about, um, you know, what we do now. But first, I have a disclaimer. I need you guys to realize that I didn't know these women, Carrie and Margaret, their mother Ella, or their grandmother Nancy. And what I'm sharing with you today is stories that I've heard. So if it seems like you've heard a different story, let me know. Send me an email, leave it in the comments, send the Goodell Facebook page a message so that we can try and fix that. I only have the information that has been shared with me and that we've gleaned from historical records and photographs that we found and diaries. So, I am by no means the authority on what exactly happened 100 years ago, but this is what has been told to me. So just to start, these are the women of Goodell Gardens, well, just Goodell in general. But if it weren't for each and every single woman on your screen right now, Nancy, Ella, Carrie, and Margaret, Goodell Gardens and Homestead wouldn't exist. And we'll talk about that here, as we move on. But I just want to make sure that's something that we're all well aware of. Had it not been for these four women, Goodell Gardens and Homestead wouldn't be what it is today. So yeah, and I love these photos of them. So Nancy, we're going to start with her. Nancy Gleaton Goodell was Carrie and Margaret's grandmother. You can see her here with her husband George, and Nancy was born in September of 1846. She lived 66 years until 1913, March 14th, and she and her husband ran the Goodell Shared grocery store. So it's really important that we talk about Nancy for a couple different reasons. And the first is that she's accredited for securing the farm purchase from Milton Randall in 1876. So the Goodell family lived in Edinburgh before they moved to the farm that is now Goodell Gardens and Homestead. But everybody in town wanted to buy this farm where we are right now, and there was a man named Milton Randall who owned it, and people who were, lots of rumors, he's going to sell the farm and we really want that. It's prime location, it's beautiful, it's really good soil. And so Nancy and George had been talking about buying this farm, and Nancy was visiting her family in McLean, which is roughly where Brannon Woods is, or I guess now it's called Keystone Armory, but that's about where her family's farm was. And she was there visiting her family and having a wonderful time, and one of her cousins showed up and was talking about how he was going to buy this farm. And she thought, you know what? I want that farm. So she actually hopped on her horse and ran to town, back to Edinburgh, as fast as she could, and found George and said, go buy that farm right now. So I'm sure that it caused some huge rifts in the family. But if it weren't for Nancy's quick thinking and action, Goodell Gardens and Homestead wouldn't be where it is today. And she also is sort of responsible for some of our funding as well. Now, this is, again, a story that I heard. I don't know if it's true or not, but we talk about it a lot at Goodell Gardens. Nancy and George, they were essential in starting what was the first Bank of Edinburgh, which then went on to become Marine Bank and then was purchased by PNC Bank. It's my understanding that George actually sat on one of the first boards for the bank when it was first started. And we've heard rumors that Nancy actually kept funds. She kept money for students at Edinburgh Academy and Edinburgh State Normal School before there really was, the ability of these folks to purchase or to have a bank account in Edinburgh. And so later on, we'll talk a little bit more about just the money that was left by the Goodell sisters and their family. But I think it's important to note that Nancy has a lot to do with that. So let's not forget about Nancy and the money. So here we have Ella Parsons Goodell. Ella was Carrie and Margaret's mother. And so you have a picture of her up at the top holding Carrie as a baby. If you've been to one of our Mother's Day brunch events, you'll remember this photo, because we actually use that during our Mother's Day brunch events for our ads and other things like that. Down below, there's two photos. So the first one is Ella with Margaret, and the other one is Ella with Carrie. And I'm pretty sure these were taken the same day. Ella's wearing the same outfit in both photos, and we found the photos in the same scrapbook that belonged to Margaret. Ella was born in September of 1877. She passed away in February 1959, so she lived 79 years. And Ella was born in a log cabin on Grub Road in McCain, and so she was the first child of Frederick and Teresa Whiteman Parsons. And until Ella was 7, her family actually lived in McCain, downtown, I guess, if that's what we're going to call it. I'm sure it was bigger back then. Not that I have a problem with McCain. I love how small and beautiful it is. But so in McCain, her dad actually operated a meat market. And later on, he purchased a farm in McLean, which is the farm that we've been talking about, where well, I guess it's not. She purchased a farm in McLean. And they lived there for a while. Ella's father died in 1888 when Ella was 11. And so during that time, her mother actually ran the farm and supplemented their income by making butter and picking berries that they'd sell in Erie. So that's just another item of agricultural history we have there, which I think is pretty cool. She also took in sewing. And then in 1899, when Ella was 22, her mother died. And so Ella had younger sisters and a younger brother, and she felt responsible to help make sure that, these younger siblings were able to grow up and have a good life. So she actually worked as a seamstress and a dressmaker. And only after her brother and sisters were established in homes of her own did she herself decide that it was okay to marry. So she actually was 30 by the time she was married, and that was in 1907. So that was, very late in life for most women to not get married, their first marriage, until the age of 30 back then. And so Ella married her husband, Todd Goodell, in Westfield, New York, on September 23rd, 1907. And I don't know if you've ever been to Westfield, but it's beautiful. And I just think that that's wonderful that they snuck away to Westfield. Well, I don't know if they snuck away, but they drove away to Westfield to get married because they were both Edinburgh people. And so she had 3 other children besides Carrie and Margaret. They were all boys, but they all passed away shortly after birth. So that's Ella. Okay, so now Carrie Goodell. Carrie's probably the most famous of the Goodells. If you've heard any stories about the Goodell family, you've heard them about Carrie. Carrie was the more outspoken of the sisters. She lived the longest. Her photos in the newspaper a lot, or it was, and she was pretty infamous around Edinburgh. So Carrie was born in 1908. She lived 92 years until June 9th, 2001. And so we have some photos here. The 2 that are not a professional photo are actually photos that Margaret, her sister, took of her. And then this last photo is actually her high school graduation photo. And so one thing that I think is really, really cool is that both of the Goodell sisters grew up in the house that we currently use as our welcome center. And Carrie actually kept a journal nearly every day of her life. And that really allowed us in the early years of the organization to kind of get a better understanding about the sisters and the way that the Goodells lived. And so we're really lucky because the Edinburgh Baron Furness Library on Edinburgh University campus actually has an archive room where they store lots of our 2-dimensional archives, including photographs and also Carrie's diary. And I think that that's wonderful. But just some insight for those of you that are looking for some good gossip. Most of Carrie's journals just have information about data like whether what they planted, what she paid for the plants. There's some gossip and some dramatic moments as well, but most of them are just, this is today, and this is what the weather was doing, and this is what we did around the farm or in the garden. So then we have Margaret Goodell, and she was known as Peg, born April 14th, 1910, lived 86 years until April 9th, 1997. And so I believe that means that I have to say, happy birthday, Peg, tomorrow. She graduated from Edinburgh High School in 1928, and we'll talk about a little bit more of that. But I just wanted to make sure that we know how much of an amazing photographer Margaret was. She actually was an avid photographer from the age of 9 when her mother Ella purchased her first camera. And Ella, I think that was a great thing for Ella to do. And it's really interesting that they had a dark room in the welcome center, in one of the back rooms. It's no longer a dark room. I have no idea when the last time it was a dark room, but Carrie actually talks about it in some of the interviews that I've listened. So it's really neat that Margaret not only took photos, but she also developed them. She learned how to develop them on the farm. But so a lot of the photos that you'll see in the slideshow today are photos that Margaret took. Most of them are photos that she actually developed and printed, because she would just hand her camera to her sister or her mother or someone and ask them to take a photo. And so Margaret also loved genealogy. We have books in our archive that are, the history of the Goodell family going all the way back to the 1600s. And Margaret also was just a huge supporter of the Edinburgh Cemetery Association, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. A couple other things about Margaret that I think are really interesting is she was really good at furniture repair, and she actually taught chair caning classes on the farm. So those beautiful caned chairs that you see in our welcome center when you come to visit in the exhibit room that we still use for our board meetings, were actually caned by Carrie or Margaret or one of their students. And they were really kind of famous for taking broken furniture out of the trash and bringing it back to the farm and fixing it. And we had a whole room in one of the buildings before we had an auction, and it was actually filled almost floor to ceiling with piles of caned chairs, or chairs to be caned, or chairs with broken caning. And just a fun little note here is, if you have a chair that has that caning on it, make sure that you use it. If you don't actually use that chair and sit in it, it'll dry out. So the caning will dry out and then it'll start to break. So you really want to use your caning chairs as long as they aren't already damaged. We've tried to have some courses at Goodell Gardens featuring, learning the skill of chair caning, but it's really difficult because it's sort of a lost art. So if anybody out there knows how to do cane chairs and is interested in teaching a class at Goodell, let us know. We'd be happy to talk about that in the future. So Margaret was the secretary of Edinburgh Cemetery Association as well for many, many years. And in these photos, let's see, this top one, I believe that's Margaret and Todd, their father. In the corner, that's Margaret and her friend Evangeline Amadon. Down at the bottom, it's Peg or Margaret just hanging out in the woods. And there's another photo very similar to this that's of Carrie. So I'm guessing that Margaret set up the shot, had Carrie take a photo, then said, let's switch and take my picture. And then down in the far corner is actually a picture of Margaret and Carrie when they were young. And this is a Cupper photo that was taken by Cupper Photography, who was a famous Edinburgh photographer back then. So Carrie and Margaret were really highly educated women. They both graduated from Edinburgh High School. Carrie actually graduated in 1927 and Margaret graduated in 1928. And along with their other family members, they also attended Edinburgh State Normal School. So Edinburgh, all the farmers in Edinburgh decided that they didn't want to send their kids all the way to Waterford to go to school. And they started what was first known as Edinburgh Academy, and then it became Edinburgh State Normal School. And today it's Edinburgh University. In between was Edinburgh State Teachers College. And I think it's really interesting to see that that all of the farmers got together and gave land and funds to kind of create this educational institution. And the early families in Edinburgh, particularly the Goodells, really valued that education. And I'm sure other early families did as well. But Carrie waited a whole year after graduating high school to start at the Edinburgh State Normal School because she wanted to wait and get the prestigious degree from Edinburgh State Teachers College. And she knew that if she waited a year, she'd be able to do that. So Carrie and Margaret actually went to Edinburgh State Teachers College together, and they graduated with the class of 1932. And then after teaching for a few years after graduation, Margaret started working at businesses in Erie, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But Carrie taught for several years in one-room schools in the Edinburgh area, and then she decided to get her master's degree. So she actually went on to Northwestern University in Chicago to earn her master's degree in education, but she missed the farm so much. It just kind of ate at her that she wasn't at home at the farm. So she actually came back to the farm and then finished her master's degree at the University of Pittsburgh, and she earned that in 1938. So as professionals, so these women weren't just farmers, they weren't just teachers, they also were professionals. Well, I guess, and teachers are professionals too, so forgive me, teachers, I didn't mean just teachers. But during World War II, both Carrie and Margaret held jobs at General Electric. Carrie's job was actually to check the data before it went to engineering, and I think that's pretty neat. Margaret worked in the administration offices, and so it's important to know, though, that Carrie was pretty spitfire, and she decided to quit to teach part-time in February of 1944. And I actually have a quote from one of her journals to share with you. Well, the GE doesn't exactly know it, but I quit tonight. Metzner and I came to clinches, the dirty little pup. I didn't hurt myself checking the reports in the PM. I made a very elegant poster on draft dodgers and put it on display. There are lots of folks I shall miss out there, at least for a little while, but I don't make strong attachments, so that will soon be over. And I think that last sentence is really important. Carrie did not make strong attachments to very many people. So then Carrie began substitute teaching at Fairview, and she served as the principal of Fairview Elementary for a year before choosing to stay home to care for Ella, who was not well, and help her father Todd with the farm in the early 1950s. And then we have a little bit more information that the diaries tell us about Carrie and Margaret as professionals. So in 1945, somebody named Libble visited Carrie and asked if she would be a part-time teacher, and she said yes. And we actually recently found, and it's not part of this slideshow, but we did share it on our Facebook page about this time last year, a copy of Carrie's contract as a teacher, which was really interesting as well. And then Margaret moved on to work in the offices of American Sterilizer, and she actually stayed there until her retirement. So you can see that photo of Margaret is the one above in the cost department at American Sterilizer with two gentlemen who, and I'm not sure who they are. And then the lower photo is actually a picture of Carrie with her class at Gleaton School, and that's in the 1936 to 1937 class year. And it's really interesting because Carrie is shorter than some of her students, so she kind of blends in, but she's in the back row. And if you look really close, I think you'll find her. Not smiling, but I don't think not many people did for photos back then. And a fun story that my friend Patty Held told me, her family actually grew up near Edinburgh, between Edinburgh and McCain. And she had an uncle or a grandfather or a great uncle, I can't remember who, but he was one of Carrie's students. And Carrie required every student to shake her hand at the end of the class day. And this gentleman, Patty's relative, actually would crawl out the school window so that he didn't have to shake Carrie's hand. So I'm not sure what kind of teacher she was, but I'd imagine she was pretty stern when we hear other stories about her. And so other things that happened, Margaret did start that job at American Sterilizer in April of 1945. And we actually have a ring that she got from her retirement, which I think is pretty neat. And then, Carrie was more outspoken for sure. Margaret seemed to be a little bit more congenial. She kind of got along better with other people, and so she moved a little bit easier between the workday and the homestead. And so we kind of see Margaret out and about a little bit more than Carrie. And so in 1950, a woman named Jean Sheets comes to visit Carrie and asks her if she's interested in taking over the Edinburgh Independent. And Carrie says, no, I don't want to do that. But she does write for it later on in life. She takes over a column that her uncle Ned Goodell used to write called The Old Timer. And in 1952, Carrie was actually the income tax collector for Washington Township, because the farm that's now within the borough of Edinburgh used to be in Washington Township. Okay, so next up we have, so the sisters lived for a long time, but neither of them ever got married or had any children. And that's important because they didn't have anyone to leave their estate to. And so they decided to leave their estate to become a place where the public could gather and families could enjoy, and people could learn about gardening and plants. And so that decision came about through the influence of some people, including their attorney Irving Olds Murphy. And so Margaret had already passed away, and Carrie was not well. She was in Edinburgh Manor, and she was dying. And some of her last words were, "There's money in the basement." Now, before I say this, quick disclaimer, this is a story I've heard. Second of all, I promise you there is not currently any money in the basement at Goodell Gardens, so please don't go and try and find it, because there's none. If there was, we would have found it by now. But Irv and a group of people from the first board of directors of the Goodell Project went to the house, and they went in the basement and they found an overturned crock. And I don't know if this is a photo of that particular crock or not, but there were a bunch of crocks in the barn at one point in time, and one of them had to have been the crock that we're talking about. And inside that crock were metal boxes full of money. And they found, I've heard a few different numbers, I'm going to choose the smaller of them, $600,000 in cash buried in the basement of Goodell Gardens, the Goodell family home at the time. And they kept finding money hidden everywhere. So there were all these rumors early on that Goodell Gardens had a ton of money because of stories like this. But it's important to know that Carrie actually left her estate, the land and the funds, to the Erie Community Foundation, who were then to form this organization, which is now Goodell Gardens and Homestead. The Community Foundation actually still owns all of the Goodell Fund. I guess not all of it, because some of it's been spent, but Goodell Gardens and Homestead actually only owns the property. The funds are held in a fund at the Community Foundation that exists to support Goodell Gardens and Homestead, or other community organizations in Edinburgh if Goodell Gardens should ever dissolve. So again, really cool story. Bunch of money buried in the basement. Promise it's not still there. Please don't go looking for money. We've done it. We work there. We have not found any additional money since the early years. But it's really interesting to hear the stories about the money. Eric Randall, who was one of our founding board members and accredited with helping to start the organization, he actually told a story at one of his last board meetings about finding a gallon-sized jar full of white beans in the basement, and they dumped it. And what they found inside of it was a smaller jar filled with $1,000 in sequential $100 bills. So really, there's just the Goodell sisters lived through the Depression. They didn't really trust banks. They owned a lot of stock in PNC Bank because Grandma and Grandpa helped start that bank. And it's our understanding that they would take those dividend checks from their stock in PNC Bank, and they would take them to the bank once a week in their fancy old 1950s Chevrolet car, and they would come back to the farm and put it in the basement. So I think that's really interesting and something to think about when you think about folks who grew up through the Depression, who were painfully frugal and who did some quirky things. So Here's Carrie later on in life. Up top is a photo of Carrie holding a big old basket of flowers from her gardens, and another photo of her gardens from a long time ago. Carrie and Margaret really didn't want anyone to take the property and turn it into a shopping mall or a housing development. And there's this amazing article that the Erie Times News published in 2000, 2001, I think maybe 1999, towards the end of Carrie's life, but when they were starting to announce all of these amazing plans. And Carrie says, no developer will get his hands on this land, even if I have to come down from heaven and raise Cain. So really, we're trusted as a community, as a membership, as an organization to take this farm and the history and the legacy of the Goodell sisters and their families before them and turn it into just an amazing community space, a green space for the community. And that's something that we're working to do. But I just think that it's really interesting because Carrie and Margaret weren't very popular people. They weren't known for welcoming a lot of people onto their property. At one point in the 1970s, they actually put up a chain link fence around their entire 80 acres to keep people out. And then they turned around and left their gardens and their property and their family homestead and farm to become a place where people could go and visit and learn about nature and horticulture and agriculture. And I just think that that's amazing. I still get chills when I think about that and how lucky I am to be somebody who gets paid to be there. So let's talk about the farm. So we have roughly 80 acres of land. Please forgive my not great throwing some lines on a Google Earth map in PowerPoint art here. We have a wonderful graphic artist on staff, Melissa Moreland, who has a beautiful map, but I just don't have it on my laptop right now. So you can see here, this is where we're located. Here's downtown Edinburgh, right? Here's Edinburgh Lake. The university is over here. This is the north entrance to the university, roughly right here. Post office, IU, okay. Penn Union, Shellhammer Drive. Here's Harrison Drive. So you can see where we're at. And we recently traded some land with Cemetery Association. So this portion here, if you can see my mouse, this used to be Goodell Gardens land, but we really kind of had our eye on this parcel that was originally left to the Cemetery Association by Carrie and Margaret. This portion has some beautiful topography. It actually goes down to Edinburgh Lake Cove that a lot of people don't even know about and don't have any access to. And so we were actually able to, I think the year before last, swap some land, maybe it was last year, swap some land with the Cemetery Association and be able to start doing some different things. So this parcel is much better for a cemetery. This parcel is really just cool and interesting for a public garden. And so we have all of this that's outlined in yellow. Our neighbors on Shellhammer Drive and back here on Aspen Way, and over here on Harrison. You know, these are all pieces of property that belong to Goodell Gardens. And today, right now, we have most of our activities happen right here where it's still green in this inner belt. But we're working on developing our northern property. You know, the sisters didn't say, hey, here's our land, leave it in farmland forever. But we do actually rent, we lease a large portion of the farmland to a farmer that's the same farmer who the sisters leased their farm to when they were still alive, later on in life when they could no longer care for it. So the family of Millie and Millie Williamson and her son Jeff actually do still lease the land from us. And recently we have planted 36 oak trees right in this region here. And those were actually donated by Randy Walker's Mighty Oak Tree Farm in their, they were planted in honor of his mother, Evelyn Walker, who actually can see those trees from her house. And so, you know, this is what we do here. We're within the borough of Edinburgh. This is where we're at. And I think that one of those concerns that Carrie had about a developer coming in and taking her family's land has to do with the fact that we're right along Route 6N. We have access to Route 99 from Tarbell Lane. And so it's really important that we keep that in mind, why she had those fears. So we're doing our best to be good stewards of her land. So Goodell Gardens and Homestead was originally incorporated as the Goodell Project in August 15, 2001. And then we later, once we went through a master site plan and strategic programming planning process, we became Goodell Gardens and Homestead. And today we're actually we're a public garden and arboretum and community event space. And our mission boils down to this. Our mission is to encourage public understanding and appreciation of plants, their relationship to humanity, and the heritage of the Goodell family. So that's what we do today. And here's just a wonderful photo of Carrie and Margaret from June of 1989. I love this picture. We have very few color photographs of the Goodell family, obviously. In the background behind Margaret here, you can actually see one of those caned chairs that she worked on. And directly behind them, you can actually see just the family photographs. So we have taken a lot of those photos, scanned them, saved them, and then taken them to our archive at Edinburgh University. You'll also, if you've ever been in the Goodell Gardens Welcome Center, this room behind the sisters that you can see is actually the museum room or exhibit room. There used to be a wall halfway through it, and that's actually been taken down so that we have lots of space in our exhibit. It's my understanding that if you ever went to visit the Goodell sisters, you would come in the back door off of the kitchen, and you really weren't allowed out of the kitchen unless you were somebody that they really, really knew well. So this is just a really neat photo, and I love to share it. So a quick note about the sisters during the time of COVID-19. And again, disclaimer, these are things that used to exist at Goodell Gardens, much like the money in the basement, they don't currently now. So please don't show up at Goodell Gardens expecting to find these things, because you won't. But Carrie and Margaret grew up during the Great Depression, and they really were worried about maybe running out of money or not being able to find the things that they needed. So they stockpiled toilet paper and soap before it was cool to do that. And I'm not recommending that you go out and buy pallets of toilet paper or lots of soap, but when the board of directors took possession of the property, it's my understanding that one of these smaller rooms in the building was filled floor to ceiling with toilet paper and facial tissues. This is not a picture, obviously, of that. It's a picture I found on the internet of a pallet of Scott toilet paper. And I show you it as a pallet because we have a good friend and neighbor named Thelma, who kind of was the closest thing to a child the Goodell sisters had. And she recalls stories of visiting the Goodell sisters, asking them if they needed anything because she was going shopping. And one of them saying, yeah, we're actually running low on toilet paper. Could you pick us up a pallet of toilet paper? Crazy, I know. Anyways, so it's my understanding, and of course this all happened before I started at Goodell Gardens in 2011, but it's my understanding that for the first 5 years that the organization was open, we never had to buy toilet paper, because toilet paper was we just used the toilet paper that was already there. It was taken care of. Facial tissues, same deal. I actually remember bringing my own tissues in from home because I had a cold, the first year that I worked there, or seasonal allergies or something. And the only tissues Goodell would provide at the time were tissues that were there since forever, part of the estate, right? And they were too scratchy on my nose, which is kind of funny. But again, all of that toilet paper, all of those tissues is gone. And then we also inherited a large quantity of 3 types of soap: Lux soap, which is pink and very fragrant, Ivory soap, which is white soap, and then lava soap, which is green. And so obviously there are different reasons for using different types of soap, but there was just a whole mess of soap as well. So that's just a fun fact, something to think about while we're talking about toilet paper hoarding and washing your hands. And maybe the Goodell sisters knew something way back then, who knows? So this is just a beautiful photo that our former executive director, Dana Atwood, took in the summer of 2017. He was actually on the roof of the bank barn when he took this photo, but I love it. I think it's gorgeous. It makes, it really shows kind of the central location where all of our events happen at Goodell Gardens. That's our events barn. And some little trees that are not so little now. It's interesting how quickly they grow, but it's just a beautiful photo. So what do we do today? What is Goodell Gardens, right? Like, what do you do? We offer educational programming, including Garden Sprouts Preschool. And these photos are fun because some of them are from our very first class of Garden Sprouts from 2011. But this photo of the woman in in the dressed up outfit is actually Chris Detter. She's a wonderful volunteer. We call her Mother Nature, and she actually volunteers to teach our Garden Sprouts class. We also offer educational programming for not just children, and also field trips. So we do that, and we cannot wait until we're able to gather at Goodell again and host events like this. We also host festivals. So here you'll see photos from the Edinburgh Art and Music Festival, and then also our Homegrown Harvest Festival. We're really sad that we're not able to host the Edinburgh Art and Music Festival this year. It was scheduled for the third week in May. We really respect and appreciate the leadership of the Edinburgh Art and Music Festival committee for choosing to cancel that event, because we understand how hard it is to make a decision like that. But we also appreciate their position and that they're trying to keep everybody safe. So we can't wait until 2021 when we can have a big giant party in the barn as well. And then we do offer the site for rentals for special occasions or parties. Typically that means weddings. So here are just some photos of some weddings, wedding rentals that we've had in the past. And again, if you have a wedding rental with us at Goodell Gardens for 2020, we are in communication. Check your email. We're doing the best we can to keep as up to date and with you and to offer you everything we can right now. And then we do also have a summer music series, and we used to have a sing-along preschool series with Lori Burke. So these are just some photos of concerts in the past. This is Tiger Maple String Band down below. And so we really hope that we're able to host those this year as well. If we're not able to host those classes, or I'm sorry, those concerts, we'll do our very best to bring them to you online. And then I needed photos of flowers. So these are some photos of springtime in the past. Bloodroot is my favorite spring flower that grows at Goodell Gardens. This is not a photo from this year, but I will tell you that bloodroot is blooming. Hopefully it didn't all bloom before it rained snowed and then rained, because as soon as the rain hits those petals, they fall right off. But the sisters had just a ton of bloodroot. It is a native wildflower in northwestern Pennsylvania. Ours is actually throughout the entire gardens. And if you take a look at the leaves here, that's actually what you're going to see during the season, because bloodroot is never in bloom when we're open. They have these really interesting leaves that are all over at the gardens. We get a lot of questions about, like, what is that plant? And it's just the leaves left from the bloodroot blossoms. And here's more photos of them. Again, sorry, you'll have to indulge me. They're my favorite. But they bloom lots of different places, particularly around Carrie's cabin and underneath the red oak that we have there. This is the Carolina Silver Bell. This is normally in bloom during the Edinburgh Art and Music Festival. So like right around the third week in May, maybe the beginning of June. And we are particularly lucky to have this Carolina Silver Bell here in Edinburgh at Goodell Gardens, because it actually should not live here. It should live in the Carolinas, like the name is, like the name indicates. But somebody, I'm assuming Carrie, actually trained this tree to become sort of an umbrella. So it actually is trained and propped up so that you can sit underneath it. And we actually keep a really nice little bench underneath that tree. And it's my favorite place to eat lunch during the summer. So it has these beautiful bell-shaped flowers in the spring, and then it leaves out, and then it's almost like a little clubhouse. Nobody can find you there, which is probably the reason why I like to take my breaks there. But it's just beautiful. Here's some more photos. Glory of the Snow, which is in bloom right now. Magnolia, we actually have a saucer magnolia right along our fence line, which is absolutely beautiful. We rarely get to actually see that saucer mag in bloom because it normally buds out and then we get our late frost and it's done. So we're hoping for this year. And then some fiddleheads from the ferns in the gardens as well. We have lots of beautiful ferns in our woodland gardens around Carrie's cabin. a couple more. I promise we'll be done soon and I can address questions. But here's some trillium, another native wildflower. Those are also by Carrie's cabin underneath the red oak tree. And they're cool. I remember when I was in 5th grade, we learned about them in science class. Mr. Kibler took us on a walk, I think a field trip walk, maybe to his house. Not that any of you know who Mr. Kibler is or where he lives. We actually went and found these and learned all about them. Another picture of the beautiful saucer magnolia in the spring with bleeding hearts underneath it. And we actually have 2 different types of bleeding hearts. If you look really close at this photo, you'll see that we have the traditional typical version here that you see all over the place. And then in this corner, you'll actually see some different ones. And those are our native bleeding hearts. So those actually grew, they're indigenous to our region. My favorite tree of all time is our Dawn Redwood, which grows here. And just a fun story about that. It was thought to be extinct. Metasequoia glypstroboides is the scientific name. They thought that it was extinct. And then shortly after World War II, they discovered a grove of them in China. So Carrie wrote a letter to Harvard University and requested 2 saplings. She planted one here on her farm and one at Irv Murphy, remember her attorney, his home. And she was so mad because she spent $14.83 on these 2 trees, and that was the most she'd ever paid for a plant for her garden. So I think that's just a fun story. And then we've got some other spring flowers here. So thank you so much for taking your time to kind of enjoy this time with us and think about summer and spring and really just being at the gardens, learning about the sisters who left us their estate. That's so important as well. You know, they're so just amazing people, and I love the stories. So I just thank you so much. And if you have questions, pop them in the comments below. If you feel moved to and you're able to, please consider making a donation to Goodell Gardens. We are offering all of our programming, all of our virtual programming free of charge right now. We realize a lot of people are out of work, not a lot of people are able to actually give right now. And we understand and recognize that. So we're doing our best to bring virtual content to people free of charge so that they can learn and experience. But if you are able, please consider either purchasing a membership to Goodell Gardens at goodellgardens.org/member, or making a donation. And if you're on Facebook, you can actually just click that little donate button. And that would be really helpful too. That allows us to sustain the gardens. It allows us to keep the lights on. And it lets us continue to offer programming like this. So let's see, I don't have any questions in the feed just yet, but it looks like lots of you are watching. Steve Hayes says that as a child, he spent many days in the kitchen with the sisters and his grandmother, whose name was Faye Perry Knapp. I've heard lots of stories about her. That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Steve. If you have any other questions, drop them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer, probably just through replies to your comments. But thanks so much, you guys. This is lots of fun, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I know that I did too. So thanks so much for being here, and I appreciate all of your time, and we appreciate everything you do for Goodell Gardens and Homestead. So have a beautiful day. I know it's blustery out there, but yeah, stay safe and wash your hands. That's important. All right, bye.